Soul Garden.
Hello my fellow soul gardeners, and welcome now to Astro 103. We are up to episode 5 already, and we're exploring planets in transit. In other words, how planets and where they are today affects and relates to our natal chart, which is where the planets were at the moment of our birth. Last week we looked at Saturn, which is a pretty serious planet. It really kind of tells us exactly what's going on, exactly what we're learning. Today we're going to move to my favorite planet, Jupiter. Now I'm doing these in certain order, not based on the order from the sun, but based on really the order of how powerful they are in our lives. So we started with the sun and moon. Those are the most powerful. Wherever those are, that is the current topic. Saturn is where we're most serious right now. And Jupiter is our planet of fortune. Now why do they call it the planet of fortune? Well, because Jupiter basically brings opportunity. Jupiter is the expansion of our consciousness. It's where we grow. It's where we're introduced to new things. So we're introduced to new ideas and new philosophies. It is only us that holds ourselves back. And Jupiter says, did you know you have other options here? That's what basically Jupiter does. And as soon as you know you can win the lottery, then you want to win the lottery. As soon as you know you can have a hot husband or wife, then you want a hot husband or wife. Now in your natal chart, Jupiter represents where you're born lucky, and we talked about that. And Jupiter represents where you need to move and where you have fortune from a past life and that sort of thing. In the natal chart, looking at the transits, Jupiter represents the area where your eyes are being opened to the next level, where God is just showing you what else is possible in this vibration. Jupiter has a 12-year transit around the sun. Okay, it takes 12 years for Jupiter to do one cycle, which is really cool because basically Jupiter hits one sign every year, and so it's perfectly aligned with the 12 signs. So it's really cool. For those of you who study Chinese astrology, right? Chinese astrology is based on the same thing. Basically, the Chinese zodiac is basically based on Jupiter, if you want to kind of create a plug-in. They use some varying dates, but basically it's Jupiter when you can line it up to. Now, that said, Jupiter, what does Jupiter do for us? Well, first of all, look and see where Jupiter is today. At this taping, Jupiter is currently in Aries and retrograde. It's going to retrograde back into Pisces, but then it's going to go forward in Aries again. So Jupiter is in Aries. What that tells me is the Aries state of awareness is expanding. Okay? So every Aries on the planet in the next year is going to expand their awareness. Aries used to think like this, and the universe is going to give them a little more high definition ability to understand their lives. Their ego is going to be greater than it was. It means that wherever Aries is in your chart is going to expand. And remember, the Aries state of awareness is the ego state of awareness, which means in the next year, everyone's ego on the planet is going to get bigger. You're saying, God, no. Well, this is not necessarily a bad thing, especially with a light worker who doesn't have a strong enough ego, right? And for those egomaniac people that are too much ego, Jupiter will actually push you over the ledge. In fact, Jupiter can push people over the ledge when they're out of balance. I'll give you an example. Jim Morrison actually died when Jupiter conjuncted his lunar eclipse in the 8th house. He overdosed. He went too far. So Jupiter was on his lunar eclipse in the 8th house the day of his death. A little interesting tidbit there. So if you're already going too far, Jupiter can push you over the edge. If you're not far enough, Jupiter will stretch you. And the way I like to look at Jupiter is this. Let's say Jupiter is in your 7th house or enters your 7th house. Jupiter is pretty much lined up to January, which is kind of cool too. It tends to enter a new sign like the 3rd week in January. So it's very calendar based, which is awesome. So let's say Jupiter enters your 7th in January and you're in a relationship. Well, as soon as Jupiter hits that chapter 1, it's going to expand your idea of what a relationship can be, all right? And if you're in a relationship, then you're suddenly going to go, oh gosh, I don't think this relationship is big enough for me. Suddenly I want a bigger relationship. I want more. So usually the first chapter of Jupiter is not happiness, it's usually unhappiness or people realizing they don't have what they want. They realize. So a lot of times, in fact, Jupiter in the 7th is great. I've known clients, Jupiter enters the 7th, they're in a relationship, and then they meet some hot secretary or something. They don't necessarily have an affair, but they suddenly realize what they have at home is not enough, okay? Which creates a dilemma. So Jupiter can be a little bit of a bummer in chapter 1 because you realize, oh, criminy, I want more here, and what I've got currently going isn't working for me. Not a bad thing, okay? So Jupiter in the first chapter is introducing. Did you know you could have this? Did you know you could have that? Did you know this exists? Did you know you could fly first class? Jupiter is constantly showing you this and expanding your mind, expanding your awareness. And I look at Jupiter almost as like let's say we're out in the wilderness. Jupiter like plows down the trees, so just cuts down the forest when it's going direct. Cutting down, so you have a better and better view of the land and a better and better view of the world and the mountains in the background and the ocean just beyond the mountains. It just kind of cuts down, you know, our weeds or our trees, not even our weeds, just what's in the way, our ignorance, all right? Especially in chapter 1, just cuts down your ignorance. Then what happens is Jupiter retrogrades. And when Jupiter retrogrades or goes backwards after mowing down your ignorance, then suddenly in your state of awareness, you start to draw in animals or whatever, creatures or water or whatever it is in that empty land. You start to draw in the resources that you can manifest in this new consciousness that you have plowed through. Does that make sense? So in chapter 2, you continue with that. Jupiter is very, unlike Saturn, which is basically, we talked about that last week. Saturn has like plow it down, then we experiment, then we build what we finally want. Jupiter actually just keeps plowing ahead and going backwards, plowing ahead and going backwards. So, oh my God, I can have, this relationship isn't good for me. I need it, I want someone else. And then in Jupiter chapter 2, it's like, maybe you broke up, you retrograde, so you go, okay, I need to break up with you, this isn't working for me, so the consequences of plowing the land, the consequences of knowing that you want more, so when you retrograde, okay, you get divorced, you leave the relationship, you find yourself single, then Jupiter moves ahead again, so Jupiter now builds on that, so it moves ahead again, it's like, okay, I'm out in the dating world now, and I start dating these people that I find hot, but then I realize, hot isn't enough, I need spiritual too. So it just keeps building on itself. So you go out and you start dating, you plow ahead, you try all these new things out, then Jupiter retrogrades. Okay, you find one good girlfriend that is spiritual and is hot, right? Then Jupiter plows ahead again. It's like, oh, but, this person's not supporting me, or this person doesn't want to be faithful, or whatever. So Jupiter basically just keeps plowing ahead, pulling in, plowing ahead, pulling in, plowing ahead, pulling in, and when it's complete, you're at a whole new level. And you can apply that to wherever Jupiter is in your life right now. Now, it's in Aries right now, so it's ego as it relates to. So if Jupiter's in your 7th, very fortunate year for your career. You're going to see options that you've never seen before. You're going to be taking down paths you never considered. Jupiter in your 3rd, you're going to expand your mind. You've been too narrow-minded this whole time. Your vocabulary is going to get bigger. Your attitude's going to get brighter. And because Jupiter offers only expansion and growth and more in your life, abundance, it tends to be tied with hope and optimism. You feel really good, you feel really lucky, you're not too worried about anything going wrong because Jupiter's there, it's got your back, it's a gigantic planet, there's that party going on, it's got 60 moons, Jupiter shows up. The only last thing I will say to you with Jupiter is, it's kind of the lucky planet, they say, and that's because as soon as you plow the line and go, oh my gosh, I want a different, I want a different job, right? Or I want a different kind of sex life. I want richer intimacy if it's in the 8th house, or Jupiter in the 5th. My dreams, I don't want to just be this, I want to be a rock star. So the good news is wherever Jupiter is, you get it. So as soon as you realize it and you want it, I find the universe delivers really quickly. All right, and that's the great thing about Jupiter. It's like an instant manifester, instant mashed potatoes. All right, I've been talking about my favorite planet. That's all I have for this week, but I'll be back next week with another planet. Until then, live, love, be.